You hear about machine guns and poison gas, artillery that turns men to pulp, barbed wire that snags you while bullets rip through. But nobody talks about the men who walked forward with fire on their backs. The teams that shot liquid flames 20 yards into trenches packed with soldiers. The weapon so feared that if you got captured carrying one, mercy wasn't an option. German pioneers strapped 32 kilograms of fuel oil and compressed nitrogen to their spines and walked straight at machine gun nests. They called them Flammenwerfer troops, Death's Head pioneers. 890 men died in 4 years doing this work, 890 out of thousands, because the crews that operated these weapons had success rates that made commanders drool. 82% of flamethrower attacks succeeded. 82. What happens when fire becomes infantry doctrine? What did it cost the men who carried it? February 26, 1915, Malancourt, a village clinging to frozen ground 5 kilometers from Verdun. French soldiers waked to the sound of German artillery preparation. Nothing unusual on the Western Front until 3:15 in the morning when something else cuts through the shell bursts. A hissing roar. 12 streams of flame erupt from German positions and pour over French parapets. Soldiers scream. Not from the fire hitting them directly, most aren't even burned, but from watching liquid flames splash across sandbags and turn trenches into furnaces. The air itself ignites. Men flee their positions or surrender where they stand. That morning, a German reserve officer named Bernhard Redemann, age 45, former fire chief of Leipzig, proves that a weapon everyone dismissed as siege equipment can shatter infantry morale in seconds. Redemann had been tinkering with fire projection devices since 1907, running tests at Posen, where he used fire engine pumps to spray water against fortress walls, simulating flame delivery. By 1912, he had working prototypes. When war came in 1914, the German army tried flamethrowers in combat but used them poorly, wrong tactics, wrong targets, and pulled them from the line. Redemann convinced his superiors to give him one more chance. January 18, 1915, the High Command authorized a 48-man detachment under his command, Flammenwerfer Squad, Redemann. He recruited firemen, men who understood pump pressure, fuel viscosity, and had already conquered the natural fear of fire. The Malancourt attack was their proof of concept. 12 gross Flammenwerfer, the big static models, roaring from prepared positions. French positions collapsed. Screams of pain from the enemy side, Redemann wrote later. Immediate success. 1 month after Malancourt, Redemann gets authorization to expand to company strength. By April 1915, his unit becomes 3rd Guard Pioneer Battalion. 12 companies by the end of that year. 3,000 men. These aren't regular infantry handed a new weapon. These are specialists trained in assault tactics, recruited from fire brigades across Germany, organized into units that operate independently under Supreme Army Command control. They're not attached to divisions. They're deployed where breakthroughs are needed, where bunkers won't fall to grenades, where machine gun nests have stopped entire battalions cold. Redemann's troops carry 2 types of flamethrower. The gross Flammenwerfer stays in prepared positions, too heavy to move during an attack, but capable of 40-second continuous bursts reaching 80 to 100 meters. Then there's the klein Flammenwerfer, the Kleif, the weapon that defines this war's flamethrower tactics. Early models. The M1912 SAU weigh 32 kilograms. A vertical steel tank divided internally, nitrogen compressed in the lower section, fuel oil in the upper. A lance tube connects via rubber hose wrapped in linen and reinforced with steel wire to prevent kinks. 2-man operation. One carries the tank, one wields the lance. The carrier operates the pressure valve. The lance operator opens the firing valve and aims the nozzle where flames ignite via a small hydrogen torch or spark system. 18-meter range initially, 20 to 40 seconds of fuel. By 1916, the design evolves. M1916, Kleif with external propellant tank, fixed outflow pipe, 22 to 32 meter range depending on nozzle size, 30 kilograms. By 1917, they've refined it to the M1917 with improved fuel-filling pipe, repositioned feed lines, 30 to 35 meter range. But numbers don't convey tactics. Kleif crews operate in 4-man squads, tank carrier, lance operator, officer, grenadier. The grenadier isn't decoration. He protects the flamethrower team at close range with stick grenades and trench weapons. Squads move in pairs or threes. They don't walk upright across no man's land. They sprint from shell hole to shell hole in short bursts. If they need to cover longer ground, one squad fires a short flame burst to suppress enemy fire while the others advance. Then they rotate. Leapfrog tactics refined through trial and blood. When they hit a trench system, the technique is surgical. Pairs of flamethrowers approach the parapet. One fires to force defenders down. The other moves to a flanking position. When both are set, they pour flames into the trench from two angles simultaneously, the pouncing attack doctrine that becomes standard by 1916. Infantry follows immediately behind to secure the position. The flamethrower doesn't hold ground. It breaks the initial defense. Stormtroops and infantry consolidate. If you value documented World War I tactical innovation and primary source military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the 1914 to 1918 online international encyclopedia of the First World War, published by Freie Universität Berlin in July 2024, and corroborated with Thomas Wichter's German Flamethrower, Pioneers of World War I, published by Schiffer, publishing in 2007 to Sauen, which remains the most comprehensive English-language study of German flamethrower tactics and equipment based on archival records from the Bundesarchiv and Imperial War Museums. These aren't popular history summaries. These are specialist military historical analyses, cross-referenced with German unit records, after-action reports, and Allied intelligence assessments captured during the war. Now back to the information. The weapon terrifies everyone who encounters it. French Corporal Louis Barthas writes in summer 1915 after facing a flamethrower attack, "Has hell opened up under our feet? Are we right at the rim of a furious volcano? The trench is filled with flames, with sparks, with bitter smoke. The air is unbreathable. Hissing! Crackling. Cries of pain. This is before the flames even reach most defenders. The psychological shock is the weapon." Redeman emphasizes this in his tactical notes. The moral shock of the enemy was so immense that he never tried to resist physically. Positions that should hold, machine gun nests with interlocking fields of fire, reinforced bunkers, concrete fortifications, empty when flamethrower squads appear. Commanders know this. When German troops identify flamethrower units preparing for attack, Allied soldiers sometimes abandon positions before the assault begins. The weapon's reputation precedes it, but this cuts both ways. Flamethrower troops are marked men. British and French standing orders concentrate fire on flamethrower positions. Snipers prioritize flamethrower carriers. Machine gunners are told to ignore other targets if a Clive team is in view. The fuel tank on your back makes you visible. The hose trailing to your partner's lance marks you. Allied troops pour rifle fire into any area where flamethrowers operate, hoping to rupture the fuel tank. And if you're captured, the sources are clear. Flamethrower operators were rarely taken prisoner, and captured flamethrower users were in some cases summarily executed. Not sometimes, not occasionally. The language is careful, but the meaning is obvious. You don't wear that tank and expect quarter if your attack fails. July 30th, 1915. 3:15 in the morning again. German troops at Hooge, 2 kilometers east of Ypres, Belgium, hit British positions with flamethrowers for the first time. The 8th Battalion Rifle Brigade holds the line. 24 officers and 745 men entered those trenches the night before. The front line is deep, narrow, crammed with soldiers. Support trenches behind them are damaged from German trench mortar fire over previous days. They're packed in. No room to maneuver. The German attack opens with a massive explosion. A mine detonated under British positions. Then the flamethrowers. Jets of flame cut through the darkness. Silhouettes of German Stoßtruppen backlit by their own fire. The British line breaks immediately. Men flee or die in place. By dawn, the Germans have taken the crater position and pushed south across the Menin Road. The 8th Rifle Brigade attempts counterattacks. B Company tries to retake lost ground at 4 in the morning. Fails. Fighting continues for 2 days. British casualties, 31 officers, 751 other ranks. The Germans take the position and hold it. The flamethrowers' first use against British forces is a tactical success. British High Command takes note. So do British soldiers. The weapon becomes infamous. Tales spread along the line about liquid fire and men burned alive. But here's what the after-action reports actually show. Most casualties at Hooge weren't from burns. Most died from bullets or shells. The flames forced them out of cover into machine gun fire. The flamethrower's kill mechanism isn't immolation, it's panic. You see flames pour into your trench and you run. When you run, you get shot. If you don't run, the flames fill your position and you suffocate from oxygen depletion or carbon monoxide poisoning before the fire ever touches you. Bodies recovered from bunkers hit by flamethrowers often show no burn marks. The fuel burns so hot and fast it consumes all oxygen in enclosed spaces. Men die gasping. The Germans note this effect and refine their fuel mixtures. Thickening agents added to the oil create denser smoke. More carbon dioxide, faster oxygen depletion. It's not more humane, it's more efficient. The weapon scales up. After Hoog, German High Command adopts flamethrowers across all fronts. The 3rd Guard Pioneer Battalion becomes Guard Reserve Pioneer Regiment in February 1916. Regiment strength, dedicated flamethrower formation under Redemann's command for the rest of the war. It never fights as a single unit. Companies detached to support major attacks wherever they're needed. Verdun, Somme, the Eastern Front, the Spring Offensive in 1918. Between March and July 1918 alone, Redemann's regiment conducts 105 attacks, 105 separate combat operations in 5 months. The tempo is relentless. These men are constantly in action, constantly at the front edge of German offensives, constantly the first target when they advance. 890 dead in 4 years sounds low until you realize these are elite troops used only in critical assaults, not holding trenches. The casualty rate per engagement is significant, but the success rate keeps them employed. 82% of flamethrower attacks achieve their objectives. February 21st, 1916, Verdun. The longest battle of World War I kicks off with German artillery bombardment so intense it turns hills into lunar landscapes. Flamethrower units deploy from the first day. Redemann's pioneers accompany stormtroops through initial assaults on French lines, Bois de Haumont, Bois de Herbe-Bois, Le Mort-Homme. Every position that stalls the German advance gets flamethrower treatment. Fort Douaumont falls February 25th without resistance. The French had stripped it of artillery and left it with a skeleton crew. But Fort Vaux, 2 kilometers southeast, is different. Vaux is the smallest of the Verdun forts, but it's garrisoned and defended. May 14th. 1916, Commandant Reynal takes command of Fort Vaux. He's partially disabled. He refused medical retirement. The fort has no artillery. The 75mm turret was destroyed accidentally by French heavy shells in February that detonated demolition charges inside the turret mechanism. Reynal has infantry, rifles, grenades, the fort's concrete and steel structure. That's it. June 1st, 1916. 40,000 German troops mass on the slopes of La Cayette ravine below Fort Vaux. They have 10 large flamethrowers. Gross Flammenwerfer. The attack begins. German artillery pounds the fort with 1,500 to 2,000 shells per hour for 3 days. The outer defenses, the coffers that protect the moat, the flanking positions, get overrun. German troops force French soldiers outside the fort back through the gates. June 2nd, June 3rd, German troops led by Kurt Rakow attack with flamethrowers. Clive teams pour flames into the fort's entrance galleries and through observation ports. French troops retreat deeper into the underground passages. Fighting moves into the corridors. Hand grenades, bayonets, rifles fired at point-blank range in dark tunnels. Flames gushing through doorways. The Germans penetrate through the counterscarp coffers and establish positions inside the fort's outer ring. But the French hold the inner galleries. For 3 days, the battle rages underground. French troops fire down corridors at German assault teams trying to advance deeper. German flamethrowers fire back up the same passages. The air turns poisonous. Smoke, carbon monoxide, powder residue. The fort's ventilation system can't cope. Water supplies run out. Men lick moisture from the walls. By June 7th, the garrison has been without water for 3 days. Reynal has no choice. He sends a message to French command requesting they bomb the fort to allow evacuation. The request is denied. He surrenders. 574 survivors out of 600 initial defenders. Crown Prince Wilhelm, 5th Army commander, presents Reynal with a French officer's sword as a sign of respect. The Germans hold Fort Vaux until November 2nd, when French counterattacks and artillery fire make it untenable and they withdraw. 8 days after Fort Vaux falls, May 8th, 1916, Fort Douaumont, already in German hands since February, experiences catastrophe. A cooking fire left unattended in the fort ignites stored grenades. The grenades explode and ignite flamethrower fuel stored nearby. The flamethrower fuel detonates a magazine of 155mm ammunition. The entire corridor section where this happens is packed with German troops resting. 679 men die, burned, suffocated, crushed. The entire regimental staff of the 12th Grenadiers is killed instantly. The Germans don't have time to clear the bodies. They wall up the damaged section with masonry and continue using the fort. That sealed corridor remains today, an official German military cemetery inside a French fort. More Germans died in that accident at Douaumont than died to enemy fire while holding it. The Verdun offensive grinds on through summer and fall 1916. Flamethrowers remain constant elements of German assault tactics. Every attack on French strongpoints involves flamethrower pioneers. They clear Ouvrage de Thiaumont. They assault Fleury devant Douaumont. They attack Fort Souville. Each time, the pattern is identical. Artillery preparation, flamethrower squads advance, stormtroops follow, infantry consolidates, the French adapt. They developed their own flamethrowers, the Schilt series of static weapons and the portable Appareil P3 with 13-liter fuel capacity. French sapeurs who served as Paris firemen pioneer French flamethrower use. Their first attack, Vauquois, June 6, 1915, ends in chaos when their flames ignite a German munitions dump and the explosion kills French troops. But they persist. By war's end, French units field 3-officer, 137-man flamethrower companies equipped with 1 Appareil L1, 3 Appareil L2, 70P3 devices, 2 cars, 6 trucks. The French use flamethrowers to clean dugouts bypassed during successful assaults and to attack particularly difficult positions. The British experiment, but largely reject portable flamethrowers. They build massive static devices, Lieven's large gallery flame projectors weighing 2.5 tons, fuel capacity of 1,090 liters, range of 102 meters. 4 of these monsters are brought to the Somme in late June 1916 for the July 1st offensive. Only 2 survived German artillery fire before the attack. Both fire 1 shot each at 7:16 on the morning of July 1st. The flames reach well over German trenches. Then the weapons are abandoned. The British conclude flamethrowers are useful only for mine crater fighting and redoubt assaults. Too cumbersome for mobile warfare. The one exception, the Zeebrugge raid, night of April 22nd to 23rd, 1918. Royal Navy assault parties storming the Belgian port to disable German U-boat bases carry Vincent flamethrowers and Hay flame guns. The Hay gun weighs 66 pounds, 22-yard range, used by naval infantry during the Mole assault. Effective but limited? The Germans refined constantly. Wex flamethrower, introduced 1917. Wechselapparat, exchange apparatus, circular backpack tank holding 12 liters of fuel oil, spherical compressed air tank in the center of the ring. Automatic spark ignition, single operator, capable, though still typically used by teams. 10 flame bursts to 30 meters, or 3 bursts to 100 meters. The Wex becomes the standard German flamethrower for 1917 and 1918 operations. Lighter, more mobile, longer range. The circular tank is distinctive. Allied intelligence photos show it clearly. Units equipped with Wex can move faster, hit harder, and sustain operations longer than Clive units. The trade-off, less fuel capacity than the Clive, so shorter total burn time. But the range and mobility advantages outweigh this in the fast-moving assaults of 1917 and 1918. November 9th, 1916. Skroboa, Russia, Eastern Front, 4 kilometers wide, 1,000 meters deep. A massive Russian trench network north of Baranovichi in modern-day Belarus. German 5th Reserve Division attacks with the largest flamethrower assault in history. The Guards Reserve Pioneer Regiment fields 216 Clive and 24 Groff apparatuses. 4 full companies of flamethrower troops. This is Major Redemann's knife tactic, Messer tactic, designed to cut through layered defenses. Long snaking formations of Clive squads, grenade throwers, light machine gunners, automatic riflemen firing on the run. The attack follows preliminary artillery barrage. Shock troops and flamethrowers advance ahead of 6 infantry battalions. The formations pierce Russian strongpoints like blades through cloth. Concrete bunkers, blockhouses, flanking installations, everything gets hit with flames. The Russian positions are extensive, fortified in depth, but the flamethrower concentration overwhelms them. The Germans take the network. Casualties for the Russian defenders are severe. The attack succeeds because it mass produces the Hoogie effect. Where 1 or 2 flamethrower squads create localized panic, 216 Clive create systemic collapse. Defenders can't rotate to threatened sectors fast enough. Every position faces flames simultaneously. There's no safe fallback point. The psychological effect multiplies. Men don't just flee their immediate position, they abandon the entire defensive system. Spring 1918, Germany launches Kaiserschlacht, the spring offensive. Operation Michael begins March 21st. 76 divisions hit the British 5th and 3rd Armies on a 50-mile front. This is Germany's last major offensive push before American forces arrive in strength. Flamethrower units are critical to the initial breakthroughs. The tactics are now fully refined. Stormtroops advance under cover of fog and short, intense artillery barrages. Feuerwalze, the rolling barrage. Flamethrower squads move with the first wave. They bypass strong points and hit them from flanks and rear. Regular infantry follows to hold ground. The stormtroops keep moving. The offensive achieves initial penetrations of 30 to 40 miles in some sectors. British 5th Army under Gough bends but doesn't break. French reserves shift north to stabilize the line. By April's year, the offensive stalls. German logistics can't sustain the advance. But between March and July, Redemann's flamethrower regiment conducts those 105 attacks. 105, they're everywhere the offensive pushes, destroying bunkers, clearing villages, assaulting fortified farms. The success rate holds. 82% of attacks achieve objectives, but the overall offensive fails. Germany lacks reserves to exploit tactical successes. The flamethrower units do their job. The strategic situation is beyond their control. War ends. November 11th, 1918. The Treaty of Versailles bans production and military use of flamethrowers in paragraph 171. Germany complies officially. Redemann's Guard Reserve Pioneer Regiment is disbanded. The flamethrower troops disperse. 890 dead over 4 years. Thousands served. The records show over 650 flamethrower attacks documented during the war. Not all were successful. 18% failed. But the successful ones, the 82%, broke positions that grenades and artillery couldn't crack. They enabled tactical victories that shaped entire campaigns. Verdun, the Eastern Front, the Spring Offensive, every major German attack after February 1915 involves flamethrower pioneers. They become integral to German assault doctrine. Other nations adopt the weapon, but none use it as effectively or as extensively as Germany. The French field flamethrower companies. The Italians issue French models to their Arditi assault troops. The Austrians developed their own 50-liter M15 Flammenwerfer requiring 3-man crews, 2 unwieldy for offense, so mainly defensive use. The Turks received training from German flamethrower instructors. Everyone who sees the weapon in action wants it. Everyone who faces it fears it. But adoption doesn't equal effectiveness. The British never integrate flamethrowers into standard infantry tactics. Too specialized, too dangerous to operators, too situational. The French use them, but in limited roles: bunker clearing, dugout cleaning, fortification assault. The Italians find the bulky equipment conflicts with the Arditi's fast-moving assault doctrine. Only the Germans make flamethrowers a permanent component of offensive operations. Only the Germans create dedicated flamethrower regiments with specialized training, independent operational control, and doctrine built around the weapon's psychological and tactical effects. This is Redemann's legacy. Not just the weapon, the system around it, recruitment from fire brigades, 4-man squad organization, pouncing attack tactics, integration with stormtroops, centralized control under Supreme Army Command. So flamethrower units deploy where most needed, not spread thin across entire fronts. The 82% success rate comes from this systematic approach. The 890 dead over 4 years, a number that seems impossible for elite troops in constant combat, comes from this too: well-trained operators, effective tactics, support from grenades and machine guns. The flamethrower crew doesn't stand alone. They're the point of a combined arms spear. The armistice of November 11th, 1918 to Artir did not extinguish the fire. It merely banked the embers. The Treaty of Versailles, in paragraph 171, sought to legislate the flamethrower out of existence, specifically forbidding Germany from manufacturing or possessing them. For the victorious Allies, the weapon was a German atrocity, a symbol of Teutonic frightfulness best left in the mud of the previous war. But an idea, especially an idea proven to be 82% effective, does not die by decree. The men who had served in Bernhard Redemann's Guard Reserve Pioneer Regiment returned to civilian life, but the knowledge they carried did not vanish. They went back to being firemen, engineers, and factory workers, taking with them the institutional memory of how to turn fuel and pressure into tactical victory. In the shadows of the Weimar Republic, while the world looked away, the doctrine of fire simply went dormant, waiting for a new catalyst. That catalyst was the Reichswehr, the 100,000-man army permitted to Germany by the treaty. Under the leadership of men like Hans von Seeckt, the German military establishment engaged in a systematic campaign of clandestine rearmament and doctrinal innovation. While civilian governments came and went, the Army's officer corps quietly preserved and refined the lessons of 1918. The flamethrower was too valuable a tool to abandon. Secret testing began in the late 1920s, often disguised as industrial equipment development or fire suppression experiments. Engineers who had worked on the Wex and Kleif models were quietly consulted. They took the principles of the Wechselapparat, the donut-shaped tank, the single-operator potential, and began to improve upon them. The goal was to create a weapon that was lighter, more reliable, and easier to produce than its Great War predecessors. By 1931, these secret efforts produced a prototype, the Flammenwerfer 31. It was a direct descendant of the Wex, but refined. It was still heavy, over 35 kilograms, and its use was confined to specialist engineer units, the Pioneer, who inherited the traditions of the old stormtroops. Officially, Germany had no flamethrowers. Unofficially, the Pioneer were training with them at remote facilities, practicing the same pouncing attacks and bunker-clearing drills that had been honed at Verdun and the Somme. Other nations were not idle. But their focus was different. The Soviet Union, unconstrained by Versailles, developed its own series of backpack flamethrowers, the ROX family. Early models in the 1930s were plagued by mechanical failures, but Soviet engineers persisted, driven by the Red Army's deep interest in weapons for assaulting fortified positions. Italy's Arditi had used them in the Great War. And Mussolini's new army continued to issue the Lancia Fiamme Modello 35, a weapon doctrinally intended for attacking mountain fortifications in the Alps, but nowhere was the weapon being integrated into a broader offensive philosophy, with the same systematic rigor as in Germany. While others saw a specialized siege tool, the German High Command saw a key that could unlock the static defenses that had defined the last war and which they were determined to never fight again. When the Third Reich cast off the shackles of Versailles in 1935, the development came into the open. The result was the Flammenwerfer 35, the weapon that would become the standard for the first half of the Second World War. It was an evolution, not a revolution. It weighed 36 kilograms and carried just under 12 liters of fuel, a mixture called Flammel-Nunzen, a blend of gasoline and tar to make it stickier and slower burning. The propellant was still compressed nitrogen. Its effective range was about 25 to 30 meters. Crucially, it was designed from the outset for a single operator. The two-man Clive teams of the Western Front were a thing of the past. One man now carried the fuel and fired the lance, freeing up other members of the assault squad to provide covering fire with rifles and machine pistols. The pioneer who carried the FMW 35 were not just flamethrower operators, they were combat engineers, trained to build bridges, clear minefields, and destroy fortifications with explosives. The flamethrower was just one tool in their arsenal, but it was their most terrifying one. The first test of this new doctrine came not in the trenches of France, but in the Blitzkrieg, Poland, 1939. The German invasion saw flamethrowers used to reduce Polish defensive blockhouses and fortified border posts. But it was the campaign in the West in 1940 that truly mirrored the breakthrough tactics Redemann had envisioned. German Sturmpioniere used their FMW 35 flamethrowers to attack the pillboxes of the Maginot Line, to force the surrender of the Belgian fortress of Eben Emael, and to clear stubborn pockets of resistance in the race to the English Channel. The psychological effect was unchanged from 1915. Defenders, even in concrete and steel bunkers, would often surrender the moment the telltale hiss was heard and the first gout of oily black smoke and orange flame billowed through their firing slits. The weapon's success rate remained astonishingly high. It was the perfect tool for the close quarters fighting, required to breach a fixed defensive line, allowing the panzers to pour through the gap. But it was on the Eastern Front, beginning in June of 1941, that the flamethrower found its true and terrible purpose in the Second World War. This was not a war of maneuver against a collapsing enemy. It was a war of annihilation. The fighting was brutal, intimate, and characterized by a fight to the death fanaticism on both sides. Here, the flamethrower was not just a tool for breaking through a line. It was a weapon for exterminating defenders in prepared positions. In the initial invasion, Operation Barbarossa, flamethrower-equipped Pioniere were instrumental in reducing the Soviet Stalin Line fortifications. When the war bogged down into urban combat, the weapon became indispensable. In the shattered cityscape of Stalingrad, the front line was not a trench, but the wall between two rooms in a bombed-out apartment building. The battle was fought vertically, in factories, and horizontally, in the city's sewer system. In this environment, called Rattenkrieg, Rat War by German soldiers, the flamethrower was the ultimate room clearer. A short burst through a doorway or window could engulf an entire room, killing the occupants, not just by burning, but by consuming all the oxygen in the confined space. Soviet soldiers holding out in the rubble of the Red October tractor factory or the Barricadi gun factory learned to dread the sight of the lone German soldier advancing with the distinctive tanks and lance. They responded in kind. The Soviets deployed their ROX-2 and ROX-3 flamethrowers, which were cleverly disguised to look like a standard Mosin-Nagant rifle, with the fuel tanks worn as a simple backpack. The idea was to make the operator less of an obvious target for snipers. In the meat grinder of Stalingrad, every small advantage mattered. As the war turned against Germany, its flamethrower technology evolved out of desperation. The FMW 35 was effective but expensive and complex to manufacture. The need for a cheaper, also more disposable weapon for issue to fortress troops, and the Volkssturm militia led to the Einstos Flammenwerfer 46. It was, in essence, a disposable, single-shot flamethrower. A simple cylinder held about 1.7 liters of fuel and was pressurized by a small powder charge, fired like a flare gun. It could project a burst of flame out to about 27 meters, lasting for about half a second. It was a last-ditch weapon, designed to be used once and then discarded. Thousands were produced in the final year of the war, a testament to the German belief in the weapon's utility even as their nation collapsed. While Germany refined the weapon for a continental land war, a different kind of war in the Pacific was making the flamethrower an iconic weapon for the United States Marine Corps. The Japanese strategy of defense in depth on fortified islands like Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa created a unique tactical problem. Japanese soldiers, indoctrinated with the Bushido Code, would not surrender. They would fight to the last man from interconnected networks of caves, concrete pillboxes, and spider holes. Artillery and bombing could crater the landscape, but it could not dig out a determined defender from a reinforced bunker. Grenades and explosives were often ineffective against these positions. The solution was fire. The U.S. military developed the M1 and later the M2 flamethrower. The M2 weighed about 19 kilograms empty and over 30 full. It used a thickened gasoline fuel, napalm, which had been developed at Harvard University. Napalm was a devastating innovation. It stuck to surfaces, including human skin, and burned longer and hotter than the simple oil and gasoline mixtures of the Great War. For a Marine fire team tasked with clearing a Japanese bunker, the procedure was grimly methodical. One squad would lay down suppressing fire on the bunker's firing aperture with rifles and machine guns. The flamethrower operator, and often with one or two riflemen assigned as his personal security, would crawl as close as he could get. Then, a short, precise burst of napalm was fired through the opening. The effect inside the bunker was apocalyptic. The flaming gel would splatter across the interior, and the concussion and rapid oxygen depletion would kill anyone inside, even if the flames didn't reach them directly. It was a horrifying, but brutally effective solution to the problem of the non-surrendering foe. General Howland Mad Smith, a veteran of the Pacific campaigns, stated bluntly that the flamethrower was the single best weapon for saving American lives in that theater of war. The Allies in Europe also embraced vehicular flamethrowers on a scale the Germans never did. The British developed the Churchill Crocodile. This was a standard Churchill infantry tank modified to tow a 6.5-ton armored trailer containing 1,800 liters of fuel and compressed nitrogen. The flame projector replaced the Hull machine gun, capable of firing 100-meter jets of fire in bursts of a few seconds. The psychological impact of a fire-breathing tank was immense. German garrisons in Normandy and the Siegfried Line often surrendered without a fight the moment a crocodile appeared. Its most famous use came during Operation Market Garden and the Battle for Brest. The Americans also mounted flamethrowers on their Sherman tanks, creating the M4A3R3 Zippo. These were used extensively in both Europe and the Pacific, proving invaluable for clearing trench systems and fortified villages without risking dismounted infantry. The men who carried these weapons, on all sides, shared a common experience. They were marked men. The Great War practice of prioritizing flamethrower operators for death continued into the Second World War. A soldier with a flamethrower on his back was the #1 target for every enemy, sniper, machine gunner, and rifleman. The belief that the tanks would explode violently if hit by a bullet was largely a myth, perpetuated by movies. A puncture would not typically cause a catastrophic explosion, as there was no oxygen inside the fuel tank. Instead, the thickened fuel and propellant would leak out, often drenching the operator in flammable liquid. If this ignited, it resulted in an agonizing death. The real danger was the proximity to the enemy. To use the weapon effectively, an operator had to get within 30 or 40 meters of a position that was actively trying to kill him, all while carrying 30 kilograms of cumbersome, sloshing equipment on his back. The physical toll was immense. The psychological burden was even greater. These men were tasked with delivering a particularly gruesome form of death at intimate range. They saw, heard, and smelled the results of their work in a way an artilleryman or bomber crew never did. And they knew that capture was almost certainly a death sentence. Few enemies would extend mercy to a man whose job was to burn their comrades alive. After 1945, the man-portable flamethrower began a slow decline into obsolescence. It saw use in the Korean War, again proving effective against fortified bunkers. The U.S. developed the M9 flamethrower, a lighter model, which was used extensively in the Vietnam War. Marines and soldiers used it to clear Viet Cong tunnel complexes and bunkers in the jungles, but the weapon was becoming a liability. Its short range was a major disadvantage in a war with ever-increasing engagement distances. More importantly, the world's perception of warfare was changing. The flamethrower was seen as an exceptionally cruel and inhumane weapon. and its use often created a public relations backlash. The primary reason for its disappearance, however, was not morality but technology. New weapons were developed that could do the flamethrower's job more safely and efficiently. Thermobaric weapons, such as rockets and grenades, could create a massive blast and fireball that would produce a similar overpressure and deoxygenating effect inside a bunker, but could be fired from a much safer distance of several hundred meters. The American M202 flash rocket launcher, which fired incendiary rockets, was a direct attempt to replace the M9 flamethrower. By the end of the 20th century, the man-portable flamethrower had been removed from the arsenals of almost every major military in the world. The legacy of Bernard Redemann's Death's Head pioneers is a complex one. They introduced a weapon that, for 50 years, was the undisputed king of close-quarters combat against fortified positions. They developed a doctrine that maximized its terrifying psychological impact, achieving a success rate that modern weapons might struggle to match. But they also unleashed a form of warfare that pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, even in the abattoir of industrial conflict. The story of the flamethrower is the story of a fundamental military problem: how to defeat a determined enemy in a fortified position without suffering prohibitive casualties. For half a century, the answer was fire. The cost was paid by those who faced the flames, and equally by the men who walked forward with fire on their backs. They were the tip of the spear, the breakers of stalemates, the men sent to do the most horrific work imaginable. And in the annals of military history, the hiss of their weapon remains a chilling echo of a time when hell itself was infantry doctrine.